In this video, I'm going to show you how you can make a remote mount carburetor mixture regulator for your paramotor. This device will allow you to make fine carburetor mixture adjustments while on the ground or in flight. And to get started, we'll only need a few parts from the local hardware store. First, we'll need a 1-inch long threaded aluminum spacer and a 3/8 of an inch long matching screw. And finally, a pair of screen door roller wheels. First, we'll start by making the carburetor linkage adapter. To do this, you'll first need to remove the high-speed mixture screw from the carburetor itself. Next, the spacer must be modified to create a collar that will adapt to the mixture screw. By selecting a drill bit the size of the screw's head, we can then bore into the spacer, removing the threads and creating that collar. I recommend using a drill press for this job if you have one available. A drill press will allow you to drill straight and centered, and also allows you to set a drill depth limit, which will prove to be very handy, as you want to maintain some threads on the other side to attach the bracket to. Here you can see the material that was removed. About 25% of the threads remain intact on the other side. This screw will later be used to attach the regulator bracket. The mixture screw should now fit snugly inside the collar. With the screw pushed into the collar as far as it'll go, use a Sharpie to index the depth of the screw into the collar. Then, using that index mark, scribe the hole of the mixture screw onto the collar. Then, select a drill bit size that matches the hole. Using this drill bit and the drill press, drill a hole all the way through the collar at the measured location. If done correctly, the hole in the collar and the hole in the screw should line up. Next, select the appropriately sized roll pin to fit the hole. These can also be found at the hardware store. To make it easier to insert the roll pin, I recommend using a slightly larger drill bit to chamfer the edges of the hole. Finally, drive the roll pin through the collar and the screw to lock them together. With the roll pin in place, any extra can be cut off flush with the outside of the collar. With the roll pin now securing these pieces together, we can now set this aside for later and turn our attention to the regulator mechanism. First, we must separate the screen door roller wheel from its metal carrier. That can easily be done by drilling out the head of the rivet. The next part will require some additional parts I bought online, like this universal cable kit, this small project box, and this small thumb knob. To begin, we'll start by drilling a hole in the screen door roller wheel to accommodate the knurl at the end of the cable. Once the hole is drilled, the outside of the wheel will need to be notched to allow the cable to pass through. Here I chose to use a 3-inch cutoff wheel because the thickness of the blade matches the thickness of the cable. If done correctly, the cable barrel end should fit snugly and rotate freely within the roller wheel. Using the same process as before, you'll want to make another matching hole just to the side of the one that you already made. Make sure to test fit both cables into the wheel sockets before moving on to the next steps to ensure that both of these cables will have free travel and won't need to be disassembled later. Next, holding the wheel inside the box for visual reference, find where the cable will need to enter the box, mark it, and then cut a notch so that the cable can be inserted. With the notch cut, press the cable in place and tighten the hardware. Carefully position the wheel inside the box on the opposite side of the cables. Make note of its position and drill a hole in the center. Insert the thread of the thumb screw into the box and make sure the wheel fits properly on it. Again, using the same process as before, cut another notch for the additional cable on the other side. With everything now roughed out, all of the components can now be loosely fitted inside the box for a test fit. By manually pulling the cables, we can confirm that the wheel and cables travel smoothly. Now you'll want to tighten everything together. Start by running a nut all the way down the threads of the thumb screw to the bottom. Here, I chose to use a little bit of Loctite at the bottom portion of the threads to keep the nut from turning later. Then snugly tighten the nut against the box, then reinstall the wheel over the remaining threads. Finally, install a star washer and a top nut to secure the wheel in place and bind it to the shaft of the thumb screw. Once tightened, the star washer will create that extra bite to keep it from slipping. Now you have a functional regulator. All that's left now is to install the back cover of the box, but before we do that, use a little bit of silicone lubricant to ensure that all the components move freely. Silicone is great because it doesn't attract dust. With that taken care of, you can now go ahead and close up the box. With the regulator complete, we can now turn our attention back to making the linkage and the brackets. Using a piece of 3/4 inch wide aluminum flat stock, mark off a piece 2 inches long, and we will use this to build the linkage that will attach to the carburetor mixture screw. Once cut, place the bottom 1/4 inch of the piece lengthwise in the jaws of the vise. Then, using a hammer, bend the piece over to a 90-degree angle. I chose to use a piece of flat scrap metal to make the bend even and to keep the hammer from damaging the piece. Next, mark the center of the piece and use a drill bit to drill a hole for the screw that will attach it to the carburetor mixture screw. Then, screw it together using a little bit of Loctite to hold the screw in place. Next, using the adjustable cable stops, we'll clamp each one in place to identify the location where we need to drill the hole for the cable to pass through. Do the same thing on both sides, drilling 2 matching holes. When the holes are complete, the screw can be reinstalled in the carburetor. Finally, you'll need to build a bracket to hold the cables near the carburetor. This will need to be specific to your application. The bracket that I'm building here may or may not work on your setup. The bracket I chose to build allows the cables to enter from the side parallel to the ground. The bracket will hold the cables in alignment with the carburetor adjustment screw linkage we built earlier. When the bracket is complete, install it in place on your motor. Once everything had been test fitted and laid out, I chose to cut the extra material off the adjustment linkage bracket. This made a little more room around the carburetor and improved the fit and finish. With everything in place, feed both cables through the bracket and mark how much cable will be needed to reach the linkage. Wrapping some electrical tape around the mark will keep the cable from fraying when it's being cut. Tape both cables and clamp them both gently in a vise. Then, using an abrasive cutoff wheel, cut both cables to length. Finally, install the cables back through the bracket and tighten them in place with their included hardware. Finally, install each cable stop to attach them to the linkage and complete the installation. Now, from wherever you choose to mount the regulator, you have full control to adjust the mixture on your carburetor. This project cost me about $40, and I'll put a link to all the parts I used in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe here for future videos.